Hi, this is Colin Schwartz, and this is my presentation of the Power Spectrum Analysis Lab as a part of AE 2610. Starting with some background information, the Fourier transform is critical to this analysis because it converts our signal from the time domain to the frequency domain. This creates a graph, also known as a power spectrum diagram, as shown in the bottom left. This image shows peaks, or the frequencies that make up the signal correspond to. The height of the peak also shows how much power at the top of it, meaning how much of the signal is actually made up by that frequency. Another topic that we discussed was noise. This is randomness throughout the spectrum, as seen in the image on the right, where it's not a flat line. Part of this lab consisted of track identification. This included labeling 11 different tracks based on which frequencies and peaks they corresponded. So this is shown in the chart on the left, where we can see that each set has a frequency and power point, and that singular sine waves have one frequency and one corresponding power. While more complex waves, like the triangle, square, and ramp, have nth order different smaller peaks. But the main one to keep an eye on is the underlined column, which consists of the fundamental frequency. This is the underlying frequency that makes up majority of the system. But going back to the point of those other frequencies, like the triangle and the square waves shown in the top right graph, of how their peaks decay over time. Because they're different signals, they have different decay rates. So those nth orders past the fundamental, where we start at 3,000 and go to 5,000 and beyond, they start to decay and become smaller at different rates. Another interesting signal was the frequency modulation, or the FM wave. This is because, unlike the others, that one has a frequency that changes through time. So instead of being a static peak in frequency or multiple, the main frequency actually changes itself, as shown at the bottom right on roughly green curve, showing how it goes back and forth with time. My personal experiment was power over distance. So for some background information, my speakers died, and I was debating what type of speakers should I get next. And a key point of that is, how far should these be away? How far can they be away from the person? Simplifying this to an underlying question is, how does power vary with distance from the audio source? And simplifying this once more to a singular goal is, find the relationship between the power of a 1 kilohertz sine wave and distance. And this led to a procedure of recording 3 different powers of this 1 kilohertz sine wave at increments of 10 centimeters. So this way they can be averaged out and the data can be simplified. The simplified data is shown on the left chart, with how it decreases over time and eventually decreasing into that noise at the roughly 70 centimeters mark. And on the right, it is observed a linear relationship between power and distance. So the results of my experiment varied from what was actually observed. This was part due to the expected outcome of an inverse square relationship, as seen in like light, but was actually a linear relationship, as shown on the previous slide. But what did work properly, as expected, was a decrease in the power over time, because it does not remain constant as you move farther away. There were 2 main complications in this experiment. The first one was echoes in the room, causing an inaccuracy in the power response. This was solved by soundproofing using heavy padding like blankets to mitigate the issue. Another issue was background noise, such as the AC unit in the room. To address this, a high-pass filter was used to just isolate the 1 kilohertz sine wave and above. In conclusion, speakers should be placed as close as possible to minimize the signal to noise ratio and keep the power as high as possible. And that the power and volume of speaker is determined by a constant, which is seen as the slope of that curve and varies per speaker. Thank you.